Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to the Manatee Blue Spring research webinar. So I will be sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. I hope that everybody can see this. So those of you who have attended the webinar before, some of this may look similar to you, but I tried to put some updates in there, and hopefully it won't be repetitive for those of you who've joined the webinar previously. So as Stephanie introduced me, I'm Cora Berchem. I'm the Director of Multimedia Manatee Research Associate for Save the Manatee Club. I've been with them for almost 11 years now. Started out doing a lot of the educational videos, public service announcements, maintenance of the live webcams, and then transitioned more into the research side of things and got the opportunity to work with Wayne Hartley, our Save the Manatee Club manatee specialist, who really started the Blue Spring research back in the early 1980s. So what I'm presenting today is really research that Wayne and I do together. So everything in here that is not just my production, but it is Wayne as well. So just want to make sure he gets acknowledged for all of his hard work. Some trouble here with my slides, trying to advance. Okay, there we go. So first of all, we're just going to start with a very brief Manatee 101. I really want to focus on what we do at Blue Spring, but just to give you a little bit of background for those who may be new to manatees, just some generic information. And then if you have additional questions about manatees in general, you can certainly ask them at the end of the presentation. So on average, manatees are between 10 to 12 feet long and between 800 and 1,200 pounds. They do live mainly in Florida. However, in the summer months, we may see them migrating north to Georgia or the Carolinas. Some may go as far north as Virginia or Massachusetts even. We also see them migrating west, so they can be found in Alabama, Louisiana, or sometimes even as far west as Texas. And then we also find manatees in the wider Caribbean, Central and South America, as well as in West Africa. Their diet is vegetation, so manatees can live in salt, fresh, and brackish water and can go in between those. They do feed on submerged vegetation, which can include seagrasses as well as eelgrass, freshwater grasses, as well as floating vegetation, and emergent vegetation. So they're not really picky eaters. Lifespan, they can live over 60 years of age, and we do have some at Blue Spring State Park that are definitely now in their 50s. So if undisturbed in the wild, they can actually live a really long life. Their closest living relative is the elephant and the hyrax, which most people would think it's the dolphin or a walrus or a seal. The only thing they have in common with these animals is that they're all aquatic mammals. But if you look at the ancestry, they actually have a common ancestor with the elephant and the hyrax. They are protected under federal and state law, including the Endangered Species Act, the Manatee Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Florida Manatee Sanctuary Act. Manatees don't have any significant natural predators out in the wild. However, the main threats that they're facing are really human-related, and they include habitat loss, watercraft collisions, entanglements, entrapments, cold stress syndrome, as well as algae blooms. So now for those of you not familiar with Blue Spring, I'm just going to give a very brief overview. Blue Spring is located in Orange City in Florida, and that's between Orlando and Daytona Beach. So if you're looking at the map here on the right, you can see where the little red dot is. This is where Blue Spring State Park is located. It is a first magnitude spring, and it is the biggest spring along the St. Johns River. In the wintertime, Blue Spring is a protected warm water sanctuary for manatees, which means there is no swimming, kayaking, paddling, scuba diving, boating, any sort of in-water activities allowed. People can see the manatees from the boardwalk, but the manatees can really come in there to rest and be undisturbed and just be manatees, which makes this a really, really unique place for them. So why do manatees come to Blue Spring? As you can see here in this picture, we do have quite a few that come every year. So manatees are very cold intolerant. They cannot tolerate water temperatures below 68 degrees for a prolonged period of time. So when ambient waters such as the St. John's River drop below 68, they do need to find that warm water. And the spring at Blue Spring is always 72 degrees year round. So this is kind of the perfect manatee hot tub for them in the wintertime. The manatees will go out in the St. John's River to feed. There is no food for them in the spring run. They really come into the spring to stay warm, and then they do go out to feed in the river and come back. When it is really cold, they can actually fast for a couple of days or even a week. So you may see them in the spring and not necessarily going out to feed. And then when it warms up, they will be migrating out to feed and then come back into the spring. So what do we actually do during our manatee research? So you can see me and Wayne here on our research canoe with the manatees. Our primary focus is on photo ID and genealogy research, and some of those manatees that we identify at Blue Spring go back to the 1970s. So they have been there for a really long time and have been kept track of since then. So we count the individual manatees and we also identify them. Manatees are identified by their scars, and most of them are from watercraft collisions. We, as you can see in this picture here, the manatee there in the front, this is actually manatee cedar, named after a cedar tree. This is one that we can easily identify by that unique scar that he has on his back. In order to do that, we use scar sheets and photographs. So I'll show you an example of that in one of the upcoming slides. And then the data is submitted to the statewide manatee individual photo identification database, or in short, MIPS. So while we do this research at Blue Spring, there's many other researchers and agencies and organizations who do very similar research at other springs or other sites. So in the end, all of that data is combined and gets submitted into the statewide database. We also record the number of boat strikes that we see happening to manatees throughout the winter season. We record the number of calves and the number of manatees who stay the season, which means that we have to see them before December 31st and then again after January 1st. We also assist partners with rescues and releases of manatees, and we assist with recovery and identification of deceased manatees, mostly in the Blue Spring area, but we also get sightings from our partners from the FWC. If they find deceased manatees and they're somewhere close to our area, we get those photos and the data, and then we can see if we can match this to a known manatee. So a question that I get a lot is, how do you count the manatees? So here on this map, you can see that the spring run is actually divided into 19 transects. So if you're looking back on the left-hand side where you see the little 0, this is closest to the St. John's River. So the St. John's River will be running kind of where that blue color is here in my presentation. And then for those of you who've been at Blue Spring, there's a kind of an orange buoy line that separates the spring run from the river. So we count them by transect, and there's 19 transects total. So we will start down by the river and then make our way up to transect 19, which is the boil or the spring head. We do count them by hand, so we do not have an app or an AI or anything that does that for us. We do count them by hand and by transect and note them down in our research book, and then we all add them up at the end. Since they do have scars, we can tell most of the individuals apart from each other. So we basically write down who we see, and then if we see them again later on, we know we've already seen them, so we don't count them twice. Of course, there's always a chance that there's unmarked manatees that we may count or manatees that we may miss. So the counts are never 100% accurate, but they do give us enough data to be able to compare numbers between months, between years, between seasons, so all those kind of things. The park rangers count the manatees as well. They count them from the boardwalk. So you kind of see a little piece of the boardwalk here on the bottom. The boardwalk goes all the way up to the boil. So they count them from the boardwalk, and we count them from the research canoe. Oftentimes these counts can differ, and that's really based on conditions such as sun, wind, amount of manatees, and the observer. So on certain days where it is extremely windy, it is very, very difficult to see them from the research canoe and make sure we don't actually, stir them up with the research canoe. On other days when it's very foggy and the fog is kind of rising up from the water, it is super difficult for the rangers to see them from the boardwalk. If we wait a half an hour or about 45 minutes, the fog may have lifted and then we have perfectly clear conditions to see them from the canoe. On other days when there is hundreds and hundreds of manatees and they're all kind of on top of each other and they're resting throughout the spring run, it might be a lot easier to actually see them from up above on the boardwalk than having to try to canoe around them. So that's why oftentimes our counts differ pretty significantly, and that's just based on those conditions. Manatees also tend to react to temperatures very fast. So if it's really cold, we can have 500 manatees in. Once it starts warming up, the manatees get hungry and they're going back out into the river. So there are days where we have 500 one day, maybe 300 the next day, and then 70 the day after. So we oftentimes get people who said, well, I heard you had 500 manatees here yesterday, and now I only see 300. Well, that's because manatees are wild animals, and they're very temperature dependent. So if it warms up, they go. If it gets cold, they will be in the spring run. So here's just a brief overview that I made for you just to demonstrate what kind of data we collect. This is from the winter season 2022-23. So we do note high air temperature and low air temperature, of course, the number of manatees, and then also the water temperature. And by water temperature, I mean the temperature of the St. Johns River. So as you can see here, this all really correlates. The low air temperature, which you can see here in that light green colored graph, the lower the air temperatures, the higher the number of manatees will be. Same thing with the river temperature. Oftentimes, after a cold front moves through, it takes the river about 2 or 3 days longer to cool down and then also to warm back up. So oftentimes we see the highest manatee numbers about 2 to 3 days after a cold front has moved through. So looking at this, you can really kind of see how the temperature, both air and water, correlate to manatees. Towards the end of the season, we may even have some cooler days, but the river has already warmed up pretty significantly to where it doesn't really drop down all the way anymore. And manatees know that, so they're already out there. Also, since they are breathing air, they oftentimes can kind of feel when it's warming up, they're breathing that warm air. So even if the water gets a little bit cooler, it doesn't necessarily bring hundreds of them back in. So just a good thing to remember, we sometimes get people that come at the end of March and they say, oh, it's so cold out today. Where's all the manatees? Well, it's been warm for the past 3 weeks and the manatees have now moved on. So as you can see here, during March, we kind of have more consistent warm temperatures and the number of manatees can basically drop to 0. All right, so in the very beginning, I was talking about a manatee genealogy research. So what do I really mean by that? And for those of you who have watched my presentation before, I mixed this up a little bit. I chose a different example for this one. So we have some different numbers and names to look at here. So we basically start with a female manatee. I picked Emma here, Blue Spring 9. She is one of the very first manatees who was ever identified at Blue Spring. And then we basically track the different generations. Now, we don't really name the calves unless they have identifying marks on them that help us keep track of them. So the question marks that you see here, or the +6 no names, are calves that this female had, but we were not able to keep track of them, so we actually didn't name them. So here you can see how it goes from Emma to Elaine to Esther to Echo to Ian and to Ian's calf. So here we have a 5th generation genealogy of manatees. The males kind of take the short end here. We don't really keep track of them because we keep track of them, but they don't reproduce, so they're not really included in the genealogy. We basically go from female to their daughter, to their granddaughter, to their great-granddaughter, and so on and so forth. So who is who at Blue Spring? we have three categories of manatees, basically, starting with those that are known blue spring manatees, and they have a BS number, which stands for blue spring. So, for example, we have blue spring 107. This is Phyllis, and she's well marked and a known blue spring manatee who comes back every single season. The second category would be the unknowns. So those are manatees like you see here in the second picture that are very well marked, very easy to identify, but we have never seen them at Blue Spring before. So they get a U number for unknown, and then at the end of the season, they get a Blue Spring name and number. We also compare all of our unknowns to other researchers from other springs, just to make sure that those are not manatees that they have previously seen, that are already named, and oftentimes they are. So it's really interesting to kind of see that they're not just using Blue Spring, that they're also using other warm water sites. And then last but not least, we have the third category here, which are the seasonals. And those are manatees that are just slightly marked. They may have like a superficial scratch or something like that. And we think we can keep track of them for the season, but we may not necessarily be able to re-recognize them the following year. So they just get an S number for seasonal. So here's just a quick example of our scar sheet. As you can see, we do take that out on the canoe with us. We also have photos for each manatee, but we're not going to go out there with a huge photo album. So we do take those scar sheets with us, and they help us to look them up real quick. And oftentimes we take pictures of them, and then we later on match them when we get back to our computer. So matching manatees is not always easy. So manatees are incredible in that they can heal very, very well. So the scars will heal and change. Oftentimes new scars may cover older scars, and some scars just heal very differently than what we had expected. So just to give you a few visual examples of what I'm talking about, this is manatee Moira Rose. She was actually rescued for pretty severe cold stress. She went to SeaWorld Orlando for rehab, and in the picture here at SeaWorld, you can see how at least she has like some scars on her. The following year, they were completely healed and gray, and they are extremely difficult to identify and keep track of. Very different here. We had one that we actually gave a seasonal number because it was a very fresh hit, and we didn't really know how that would heal, how that would look the following year. And that animal came back the following year, pretty much looking exactly the same. So it got a U number, and then it actually got a name and a number at the end of the season. The next example here is, again, one that we gave a seasonal number at first. You can see that's kind of a fresh hit there on the back, and it healed very differently than what we expected. You can barely see it in that next picture. So you just never know what you're going to deal with. And this is a picture that I literally just included this afternoon because this is a manatee I just saw this morning at Blue Spring, thinking I didn't know who that was. And then Wayne and I looked at it together, and we actually realized this was Blue Spring 1494 Winona with a completely new hit. So you can see towards the tail there, those three scars, they were there last year in November when we first photographed her. And when she came in today, she had that completely new hit there on her like shoulder area, which was kind of the first thing I was looking at. So I didn't actually realize this was a manatee that we knew. So you just have to be very careful and very diligent trying to see if this is actually a new manatee or if it's somebody you know who just has a big new hit that kind of almost makes these other scars from last year seem insignificant. So how are the manatees at Blue Spring doing right now? As we can see here in this graph, since 1970, the population of manatees at Blue Spring has really increased. You know, we do see a couple of little ups and downs here. That's probably just because counts were lower that season, but we don't really see like a steep drop, like a die-off of something like that. Also, the calf numbers over time have really steadily increased. During the 2023-24 season, which was this past winter season, we saw a total of 824 manatees at Blue Spring and 93 calves, which that was a record number of calves. And we did see 697 manatees in a single day. So why have those numbers increased? First of all, like I said in the very beginning, Blue Spring is a protected sanctuary, so this is really a great place for them to be. There are good food sources in the area, and there's actually a moratorium in effect between October and March where no vegetation, including invasive vegetation, can be removed. So everything is basically left in place for the manatees to feed on. We also see a very good reproduction and survival rate, meaning most of our female manatees give birth about every 2 to 3 years, and we have a very, very low calf mortality, meaning that those calves being born into that population usually survive. The calves also seem to grow bigger and mature earlier. And then we also have some migrants from other places that come to Blue Spring. So I'm not going to go over all of these individuals here, but just to give you an idea who we see at Blue Spring. So we do see manatees coming from the East Coast, such as Brevard County, all the way down to Riviera Beach in Miami. And then we also have some of our manatees like Ansel here, who has actually been migrating to Georgia during the summer months. So this slide I just wanted to insert here real quick before I talk a bit more about what we do in addition to our main thing, which is the photo ID research. We are part of the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership, in short MRP, which is a collaboration of over 20 agencies. And everyone here is working together on rescue, rehab, release, and post-release monitoring of manatees. So just for everyone watching to keep in mind, this is not just something that Save the Manatee Club does. I want to give credit to all of the different agencies that work together to help and monitor and rescue release manatees. So what else is part of the research that we do at Blue Spring? We do assist with manatee rescue, release, and recovery. We also assist with post-release monitoring. And I want to go over just a couple of reasons for rescue. Those are examples directly from Blue Spring. They do apply, obviously, statewide. Manatees face, different rescue reasons, but there's always a common threat that they're facing. But some of those things that they experience in other places in Florida don't really apply for Blue Spring. So just some examples for Blue Spring manatees. Obviously, watercraft collision, that is a big reason for rescue, as exemplified here by manatee Leslie, who was rescued for watercraft injury. Entanglements, mostly Blue Spring, we see mostly entanglements in fishing gear, such as we see here on manatee Una. Cold stress syndrome, here is again Moira Rose. Before her rescue, she was severely cold stressed. We do sometimes get emaciated manatees at Blue Spring. This has nothing to do with the unusual mortality event or starvation. We do not see any signs of starvation at Blue Spring, but sometimes we have manatees who may have ingested something, who have some sort of internal issue, maybe a first-time mom nursing a very large calf. So we do get that sometimes, but it's not very common at Blue Spring. What is more common are orphaned calves, and that's something that is very tough because we try to really monitor to make sure that they are indeed orphaned and that they don't get adopted by another mom. So if that is the case, then we recommend rescue. So what we really do is we are kind of the first eyes and ears out there. FWC is in charge of all manatee rescues and releases in Florida. So what we do is when we're concerned about a manatee, we try to document behavior, get photos and videos, and then pass it on to our partners who can then make an informed decision whether the manatee needs a rescue or not. So instead of them having to come out there, we try to do that for them to inform a decision of whether a manatee needs that or not. Blue Spring is also a popular release spot, as you can see over here. More manatees are being released at Blue Spring. The area provides very good habitat for them. And we also release a lot of orphaned manatees that have been rescued on the Atlantic coast at Blue Spring now, just because they have an easier time and it's easier to monitor them in that system. And most of them are actually doing really well. Since we are talking about releases and we are going into the winter season and the release season, I do want to just very briefly talk about manatee tracking because it's something that we do get a lot of questions about. So I thought this was a good avenue to just give you a very brief overview of manatee tracking. So some manatees are outfitted with these tracking devices, as you can see here in the picture, and they contain a belt that goes around the peduncle, which is the area where the body meets the tail. Attached to that is a 3 to 4 foot long tether and then the satellite tag on the top. And you can kind of see a close-up here in this nice picture provided by Monica from Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute, where you can see the tag up close. The equipment contains a whole bunch of different features such as sonar, VHF, satellite transmitter, and the works. They are designed with several weak links, so if the tag gets caught on something, it will break off, so there is no danger for the manatee to get entangled. And although these devices may look cumbersome at first, you have to keep in mind this is about an 800 to 1,200 pound creature, so the device is comparable to us carrying our cell phone in our pocket. Manatees have been observed giving birth, mating, sleeping, doing all sorts of activities wearing the tracking device, and it's not something that inhibits their natural behavior. Sometimes, like I said, with the weak link, those tracking devices may come off, and you may actually see what we call a belted manatee. You can see that in the picture down below here. This is a manatee that lost the tracking device, but it still has the belt, which is actually has some tools in there that allow researchers to find the manatee if they are in close proximity. So even if the tracking device is gone and they still have the belt, there's a way to find that manatee. Manatees are either way tagged for specific research projects or for post-release monitoring. At Blue Spring, we really mostly see the post-release monitoring. So those are naive orphan animals that do not have the experience out in the wild on how to find food, how to find warm water, all those kind of things. So during the first year, they're being monitored with a tracking device, and if they fail to come back to warm water, researchers can actually interfere and get them rescued and bring them to a warm water site. So the tag is really the lifeline for those manatees, especially during that very first year and the first winter. So it is extremely important to be hands-off, to not mess with the device and not get too close to these manatees, because it really helps them to learn how to be a wild manatee. If you do see a tagged manatee, you can call it into the hotline. I put that number here on the screen. Sometimes, the tracking devices, there's something wrong with them or they may not be transmitting. So getting information about where a manatee is really helpful for the researchers. So what I've talked about so far is really what we do during the winter time. I started with Save the Manatee Club in 2014. And I realized in 2016 that the amount of manatees visiting Blue Spring during the summer months was increasing. So at first it was mainly young, recently released manatees, or maybe pregnant manatees that were ready to give birth. But over time it really increased. So I started collecting manatee summer sightings as well. And this data was not gathered doing daily morning counts, but it was gathered from the above water webcam and in-person sightings. So this is definitely nowhere near as scientific as what we do during the winter time, but it still gave us some sort of idea how many manatees were visiting, and as well as what they were doing, where they were spending time, and was it mothers and calves, or what kind of manatees were coming. Possible reasons for an increase is that although Blue Spring is open to the public for swimming and diving and paddling in the summertime, it's still a protected area with no motorboats, so manatees may be coming in there because of that. We also see it as a calving ground, meaning some pregnant females will come in there to give birth. We have, in general, seen an increase in the manatee population in the upper St. Johns River, so if we see more manatees in the winter, we may also be seeing more manatees in the summer. And then last but not least, manatees are very curious creatures. So some of them I feel come in into the spring run during the summer because they're curious about what's going on in there. So since the sightings did start to increase alongside the Florida State Park Service, Volusia County, and Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute, we started the Manatee Observer Volunteer Program in 2016. And you can learn more about that on our website. This is a collaborative program, and we have volunteers out there pretty much every day in the summer months, both on kayaks and on the boardwalk, helping to educate about manatees, collect sighting information, and also to prevent harassment. And if anybody on the webinar today is one of my observer volunteers, big thank you to everybody, because there's no way we could be doing any of this without our volunteers. So now, if you cannot come to Blue Spring and you still want to see manatees, we do have our live webcams. So since we just started them back up, I wanted to make sure to at least include them here. You can see us here installing the underwater webcam. You can kind of see it being assembled in the picture here on the right. We were installing it, and of course we directly had 2 manatees that were coming to check it out. And here you can again see us installing the underwater camera as well as the above water camera, and a nice shot of a manatee and an alligator, which we actually recorded with our above water camera a couple of years ago. So the webcams are a great education and entertainment tool for the public. They can watch them live on our website and our YouTube channel, but they also assist us with our research. And they are a collaboration with Explore.org and the Florida Park Service. So we have 2 cameras at Blue Spring, 2 at Homosassa Springs, and 2 at Silver Springs. So when I say they are great for the research, what does that mean, and what have we actually learned? First of all, we can gather additional sightings of manatees for our photo ID research from the webcam. We can also monitor behaviors, especially those that are hard to observe and document in person. And we can collect observations on manatees of concern without having to get in the water. And this is really, in my opinion, the most valuable thing, because if a manatee is not doing well, we want to try to not stress it out. And those webcams are basically just there, observing them. The manatees may not realize that they're there, and we don't actually have to get close to the animals to get close-up photos, which may influence their behavior. So just to give you a couple of examples of what I actually mean by all that. So we had Hanako. This is a picture of her last year. She had some buoyancy issues when she was swimming, which was a behavior that was really hard to document in person while we were out there. So although this is underwater photo, we were able to document that behavior on our above water camera and then share those sightings and that information with our partners. Here we have manatee Matahari. This is actually from our summer sightings. She was the focal female in a very large mating herd in May of 2023, which was caught on the webcam. And then she came in with a little calf in June of 2024. And again, it was caught on the webcam. And this was a really great opportunity for us to collect photo ID on over 20 known male manatees that were part of that mating herd. So they were just swimming by the webcam, as you can see in this picture, and we were able to get additional pictures that we could clip out of the footage to use for the photo ID. Here we have once again Moira Rose before her rescue for cold stress. She swam by our underwater webcam and rolled over, and we actually immediately saw that she was also heavily pregnant. So this was again something that influenced the decision to rescue her. And then last but not least, we have Ting Ting. I know it might be a little bit difficult to see that in the picture there, but this was a case where our above water camera was actually able to monitor her and see that she was trying to approach different females. She was trying to nurse, but she was being pushed around by them. So it was really great to have the webcam basically do that work for us. we're there pretty much every morning, but we're not there 24/7. So going through that webcam footage and actually seeing that this behavior was continuing throughout the day for multiple days in a row really helped influence the decision to determine, okay, she is an orphan calf, she is actively trying to nurse, she's not able to nurse, and her condition is declining, which then informed the decision to rescue her. So I want to end the presentation with just a quick slide and plug in for our adoption program. I was hoping, since today is November 21st, that I would be able to give an update on which adoptees we've seen so far this season, but it was unseasonably warm here in Florida, and it just got cold basically today. And we have not seen any of the adoptees yet. We have seen Annie come in a few times in October, so she's definitely around somewhere. But if you check our social media and our website over the next, I want to say, week or two, you should be seeing some updates, and we make sure to update which adoptees have been seen as soon as they come in. And I hope we're going to see some in the next couple of days. So currently we have 21 Blue Spring manatees in our program. Like I said, we do provide regular updates on them on our website, on our social media, in our newsletters, both our e-newsletter as well as our print newsletter. So those are real living animals that we keep track of. You can learn more about them at savethemanatee.org/adopt, or just go to adoptamanatee.org. Same thing. So what does it include to be in the adoption program? First of all, the manatee must have some sort of identifying marks that allow us to recognize the individual, because we want to give you an update about whether your adoptee has been seen. And so it has to have some sort of identifying marks. A lot of people ask me, well, is so-and-so calf in the adoption program? The answer will always be no, because we cannot keep track of that calf. So I can tell you we've seen a calf, but was it this or that calf? I don't know. So they need to have some sort of identifying marks that let us know this is definitely that manatee. They also need to have at least a few years of regular sightings at Blue Spring, since we want to provide updates on the manatees. We don't want to include somebody that we have just released or a manatee we've just seen for the very first time, because if that manatee then doesn't come back, you've adopted a manatee and you would not be getting any updates from us. So we're trying to at least be sure that it has a consistent sighting history coming back to Blue Spring, so we can be sure that we can provide those updates. Usually it should have some sort of interesting history. So a lot of our adoptees are either way long-term Blue Spring animals that have been seen since the 1970s, or they were manatees like Annie, Rocket, and Una that were rescued as orphan calves and then released, or Gator, who was actually named after he was seen chasing an alligator on the webcam. So all of them have some sort of interesting history or background that makes a really nice biography and just makes the manatee an interesting candidate for adoption. And with that, I will hand it over to our audience for any questions you may have. I also put my email here on the slide. If anybody has any questions or wants more information, feel free to email me. And again, here is me and Wayne at Blue Spring. Obviously, I'm just learning from him, and whatever I'm presenting is what we both accomplished together. So let's see if there's any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions yet. I did have a question. You called the type of spring Blue Spring is. It was on the slide. I don't remember. I was just wondering more about that. Like what it means. You said it was like the first.
Yes, a first magnitude spring. So springs are basically divided into different magnitudes. So we have first magnitude spring, second magnitude spring. So it depends on how much water they release. I believe it is per second. I have to look up exactly what the number would be for Blue Spring, but it's basically based on the amount of water that is being output by the spring. So Blue Spring is a first magnitude because it puts out so much water, and that's also one of the reasons why it's so important for manatees, because it's one of the biggest springs. There's a couple of other ones in the area that are second magnitude springs as well. So I can look up those numbers and let you know what exactly they are.
So it looks like some questions are coming in. So someone wants to know, how do hurricanes affect the manatee population?
That's a good question. So it really depends on the area, and it depends on the strength of the hurricane. So there can be various different effects. Manatees have really evolved with hurricanes, so they usually seek out sheltered areas. But what can happen is either way, the storm surge can basically carry them out into open water, out to sea. At the same time, what we're seeing more is that areas are flooding, and manatees suddenly have access to areas that they previously didn't have access to. So what happens is manatees are very curious, like I said, especially if there's food in those areas. So they like to go into the areas, and then when the water levels drop, there's a potential that manatees do get stuck in those areas. So they're basically like in a small pond, or in a ditch, or in a golf course pond, or somewhere where they're okay in there, but they cannot get out. So that's usually what happens. And we've had quite a few rescues after Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton here in Florida recently, where we had manatees in areas where, due to flooding, they got in there and then they were stuck in there. Luckily, they were all rescued, they all got out. But it's something where we ask the general public to keep an eye out, especially for areas, any sort of unusual areas that you wouldn't expect manatees in, to look out for them.
Okay, so going back to the top of these questions, are the manatees equally adopted? And if not, do you promote ones needing an adopter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually was about to ask our other staff if they can give me an updated list on who is currently the most and the least adopted. First of all, multiple people can adopt the same manatee because the proceeds go to help all manatees, but there's certainly some that are more popular than others. And I mean, I do know that Alex is on the call, so if Alex wants to join in and correct me here, she certainly can. I do know that manatees like Gator and Annie and Mushu are definitely up there with the most popular. I think it's because they have, fun names. They usually hang out in clear water where we can get great pictures. Mushu and Annie, they have their calves, so they're very popular. I think Deep Den, Philip, I think I recently heard, were not as popular. I think they were kind of on the bottom of the list. I don't really know why. But we do regularly do adoption promos. I try to feature all of them, but if I hear that one of them is kind of on the bottom of the list, at least for social media, I try to feature them a little bit more, so they may get some more adoptions.
Okay, and then someone asked, is there a specific reason a calf would not be accepted by another female?
That's a good question. So we don't know for sure. Manatees do tend to adopt orphan calves, or sometimes we have a manatee that's nursing their own and then nursing others as well. Some seem to be very prone to doing that. Even when the calf is not orphan, they just nurse a whole crowd of juveniles, like Annie, for example, loves to do that. And others really do not want to have anything to do with calves that are not their own. So we don't really know why that is. We're always hoping that they would be adopted, but unfortunately there is instances where the calf is just trying to latch onto someone and the female is not having it. So I don't really know the reason why, though.
Okay, and then someone asked, how can I become a volunteer for a rescue team? I'm a diver and a veterinarian.
Yeah, great question. So like I said, the rescues and the releases are conducted by FWC, which is the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And they have 5 different field stations throughout Florida. So each field station oversees a certain area. The one closest to Blue Spring would be the Jacksonville one, as well as the one in Melbourne. They kind of split that area. So if you're interested in that, I would reach out to FWC. They do have volunteers that help with rescues and releases, as well as recoveries. There's no special training really needed. They do rescue trainings several times a year where they train new volunteers on a rescue boat. So that's a great way to get involved. I don't think you need really any prior qualifications to do that, but I would reach out to them directly. So if you go to their website or their social media, they'll be able to direct you.
Okay. And then someone said, I may have missed this, but can someone volunteer to help count manatees?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So since we are operating, I should have said that at the very beginning. So we have a state and federal permit for the research we do since we are on the water in a manatee sanctuary during the winter time. So we don't have any volunteers helping us with that. However, the park, you can certainly volunteer with the state park. And I do think that they sometimes have volunteers helping them with the counting as well. So I would reach out to the state park, in this case, Blue Spring, and inquire with them about the opportunities there.
Okay. And then, so Alex did chime in back to the adoption questions. She said this year, Deep Dent, Nick, and Merlin have been the least adopted manatees.
All right, thank you for that, Alex.
Next question. You mentioned manatees are curious creatures. Are there any strange, funny behaviors you've observed from them over the years?
Yes, absolutely. I don't even really know where to start because we do see a lot. We do have some that are very curious about the research canoe. We try to be very hands-off and not encourage that at all. But we definitely have some that will nudge themselves literally under the canoe, making it impossible to move. So we have to wait until they move on. We've also seen manatees playing with like various objects that they find in the spring run. Once we had a sign that had fallen into the spring run accidentally, and there was a crowd of manatees inspecting that. We've also had them playing with rocks. So they would basically take the rocks in their flippers and move them from like one end of the spring run to the next. Sometimes we find debris in the spring run, such as umbrellas or dive masks or anything like that. And I always feel like, well, I didn't see that yesterday. Where did that suddenly come from? And then Wayne reminds me that the manatees find that somewhere in the river and literally bring it into Blue Spring. So yeah, very weird. And then just amongst each other, I mean, that they like to play, they like to check each other out. So I've also seen manatees interacting with alligators, kind of trying to climb on their tail until the gator swims away. So they're not afraid to try new stuff.
The next question is, when you observe a manatee, how do you go about matching it to the pictures while you're in the canoe?
Yes, so this can be very difficult. So the ones that we see a lot, it's almost like I like to compare it to when you walk into a room and you see like a bunch of your friends, you immediately kind of know who is who, right? Or if you see your coworkers, you go into your office and there's 20 coworkers and you kind of just know who is who. So for a lot of the manatees that we see, if we see them a lot, you just know. With others, if I do remember, okay, I think I remember that one, I flip through the scar sheets and try to find it. Oftentimes we don't find it real quick. So either way, we quickly draw it or we quickly take a photo of it and then we go home and match it later. Oftentimes at the end of the season, we think we have a bunch of manatees that we didn't know, and then we go through all the photos and we realize maybe 10 or 20 of them are actually manatees from previous seasons. So it doesn't happen right away. But obviously you need some sort of like, I don't want to call it a photographic memory, although I'm blessed with having one. I'm terrible with numbers and math, but I do have a photographic memory, so I remember things right away. But you do need to have some sort of ability to memorize them and try to match them, but it's not always easy.
And then, are orphan manatees capable to learn survival skills by just watching other manatees around them?
Yeah, so that's interesting too. If we do have manatees that are, definitely orphaned, then they do get rescued usually and go into rehab. And that's a tough route for them because they can really only learn so much in human care. And something they cannot learn, for example, is how to find warm water, which makes it so important that they're tagged in the winter time so they're able to come back to these warm water refuges. Now, we do have some manatees at Blue Spring. We had one last year that was orphaned, but it was doing really well. It was approaching different females, it was nursing, it was in good body condition. So I do think that they learned from, observing maybe other calves, observing other females. The manatee was going out with the mother and was coming back. So I do think they do adapt those behaviors. I want to say it really depends on the individual. Some are able to do that and some are not. It probably also depends on their body condition. Do they have enough strength to go out with these manatees and to learn, or are they just shutting down and, needing rescue? So I think it depends on the animal as well.
And someone's also wondering, is there a research collaboration or university that they could connect with as they're interested, their researcher working on manatee mortality?
Yes, so we do not directly work with different universities, but for example, University of Florida is a partner of the Manatee Rescue and Rehab Partnership, so they certainly work on manatee research. We have a conservation department at Save the Manatee Club, so oftentimes we work with different universities. I know we have worked with Florida Atlantic University, Florida International University, Florida Institute of Technology. So there's different ones that we have worked with in the past. I think it just depends on the research. I can stop sharing the screen. I don't know why I was doing that.
Lots of people are sharing their stories of their adopted manatees and watching the webcams, which is wonderful.
Awesome.
Okay, so someone said, I think you said they have no natural predators. I hate to ask this, but why do gators not hunt them? Are manatees too hard for them to capture? If they swim out into the ocean, then are there predators likely?
Yeah, so no, that's actually a really good question. And we always get asked, why are alligators not a problem for manatees? And quite honestly, we don't know for sure. There is different theories, such as maybe the manatee is just too large. Usually we see alligators, catching their prey and then maybe letting it sit for a while to come back to it. So maybe it doesn't occur to the gator that it could potentially do that to another aquatic animal. I know my boss likes to say manatees are just so big and peaceful that even the alligator doesn't want to mess with them. That's a possibility. Manatees usually don't overlap their habitat with very large sharks. I mean, you may find them in like inshore waters with smaller sharks, but not really out in the open ocean with the very large ones. So I do think, we've seen some instances where there's very sick manatees or dead manatees and they're being, scavenged on by sharks or alligators. But I've never seen an instance where a shark or an alligator would directly go after a manatee.
Okay. And I can actually, so this next question I read, I can actually answer. So, well, first of all, they said wonderful presentation. In addition to adopting manatees, has your team considered partnering with Follow, the animal tracking bracelets? So I will just give a quick plug that we are currently partnered with 4Ocean, and there are manatee bracelets with 4Ocean that you can purchase, and it comes with an adopted manatee. There's 5 or 6 of them, I think, in different colors, and it's a select manatees from our adoption program. We can throw the link in the chat as well for that. But we're really excited about that. That's going on right now. Someone asked, for someone who does not live near the ocean, what are the best ways to help manatees?
Yes, so there's various ways that people can help manatees. Of course, if you're in Florida, you're in by the ocean, going slow, watching out for manatees when you're boating, recycling your fishing gear and your trash, making sure it doesn't end up in the waterways. But even if you're not close to the ocean, participating in any sort of cleanup, a lot of waterways lead to manatee habitat, and manatees are not just in the ocean, they're in like rivers or lakes, as long as the lake connects to an open waterway. So anything really trash that's on land can blow into the water, and I hate to say it, but little pieces of plastic can really be detrimental to manatees if they get stuck in their intestines. So participating in cleanups, not using fertilizer is a huge thing, especially during the rainy season. A lot of that ends up in our waterways and can cause these really harmful algae blooms. And then last but not least, is education. manatees are just not as well known as some other animals, and Florida literally lives off of tourism. So we have a lot of people coming to this state, including myself, which obviously I'm not originally from here. I grew up in Germany and then lived in New York for a long time before I came here. I had no idea what a manatee was. So educating, whether that starts in kindergarten or school or with your friends, or if you know who's someone who's going to Florida, educating them about manatees can really make a big difference. If they come down here and they want to boat or they want to see manatees, letting them know how to responsibly do that, that can really make a difference. So, and you can really do that from anywhere. You can be here in Florida, or you can be over in Europe or Australia or wherever you are. Education really goes a long way, and I think that's something anyone can do. Same thing with social media. I mean, everyone these days is on social media, so sharing our content or sharing content about manatees, that's something like anybody can do.
Okay, so questions are starting to slow down, but I do have another one. What happened with the Merritt Island disaster?
The Merritt Island disaster, I'm not entirely sure if you are referring to the unusual mortality event or if you're referring to a recent rescue over there. So if you want to clarify that, I can probably address that a little bit better.
We'll see if they can give us more detail. Oh, the mortality
event.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, so we did have an unusual mortality event along the Atlantic coast in the Indian River Lagoon, which includes Merritt Island, and that started in 2020 and was really caused by the loss of seagrass due to these algae blooms. So luckily, we have been seeing an improvement in the regrowth of seagrass, so mortality rates have definitely slowed down. But it's definitely not solved yet. You know, one algae bloom could decimate that seagrass again. So it's really important to be vigilant about what's going on. There's a lot of work still to be done, whether that's from seagrass restoration to just water quality restoration. Luckily, we're not seeing these large die-offs anymore, and manatees have been seen in better body condition. We've seen a lot of calves again, so that's definitely promising. But it's just something that, you know, everyone needs to continue working on because it's certainly not solved.
So that looks like all the questions, I think. Again, Cora did provide her email on that last slide. If anyone got a chance to write down, if you think of questions later, you can also just email us at education@savethemanatee.org. I will also put that in the chat if you think of questions later. We will be posting this recording tomorrow on YouTube. And someone asked, is the reason the trackers are large just so they are easier to find?
So the trackers have basically been tested over many years. So this was the best technology that was found suitable for manatees and for these very large animals. Not necessarily so they're better to find, but they're not. They may look big in the pictures, but compared to the manatee, they're actually fairly small. So this was the best way to kind of make sure that it works for a manatee. I know sharks have, you know, very small trackers on their fins, for example, but they're monitored very differently than manatees. And manatees come to the surface a lot. They're in very shallow water, so they're very different to track than other animals. So this was just one of the methods that was proven to be the most effective, and that's why it was designed that way.
Okay, and then another question also came in. Apart from FWC, where can I find info on the mortality around Merritt Island?
FWC would definitely be your best bet because they publish all of the mortality statistics. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service works directly with them, but in terms of mortality statistics that are being published, that would be FWC because they come out with all the numbers.
And then we do have a young viewer who wants to know, do manatees eat seaweed as well as seagrass?
That's a good question. So, yes, manatees will eat algae, which could be seaweed, could be part of that as well. It's probably not their preferred food. So, if they have the seagrass available, they will certainly eat that. They do prefer that. So, they do have some food preferences there for sure. But we've definitely seen them eating other things as well, and sometimes even algae or other, things that are floating in the water. So, yes, they can absolutely do that, but it would probably not be their favorite.
And then someone's also wanting to know what's like the estimated cost, or do you know the cost of the tracking devices?
I have to say, I don't know that for sure. If you want to contact the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership, I can probably find out that information for you or contact me directly. I don't know, I don't have the numbers here because Save the Manatee Club doesn't actually do the tracking. That is done by FWC, US Geological Survey, and the Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute. So they may have those numbers, but I unfortunately do not have them off the top of my head. I know that it is pretty expensive, and that's why there's only really a handful of manatees that are being tagged and tracked. We always get asked, why don't you just tag all the manatees in Florida so it's easy to find them? That is not feasible. So.
Okay, and then we do have a question. Do you know of any work comparing movement of Florida manatees to the other species of manatees?
Yes, so there's lots of studies going on where manatees are being tracked, both with the satellite tracking devices as well as with the photo ID research that we do. So, for example, a manatee was tagged that swam all the way from Florida to the Bahamas, and there have been manatees that didn't have a tracking device, but they were identified by the scars, and they found that there was a manatee from Tampa Bay that ended up in Cuba, for example. So there's definitely studies going on. There's also manatee tracking studies in other countries, so they can compare information about how they travel to how manatees travel in Florida. So sometimes those are collaborative projects, and sometimes they're just independent projects, and then they're being, compared. So there's a lot of those kind of studies ongoing.
Awesome. Let me see. I think, yeah, it looks like our questions now have died down. Lots of people are talking about, again, their adoptees, which is so exciting to see.
Awesome.
Again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. This was super exciting. Be on the lookout. We'll have another webinar. The topic is still to be determined, but we'll have one in the first few months of the year. And yeah, look for this. We'll send out an email with the link to watch the recording on YouTube. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions. So thank you guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.